Greens Labor prescription for the New Zealand economy.
Question number 2, Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, does he stand by all his statements?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes.
Leader of the
Speaker,
Opposition.
why did he say in June 2012 that, quote, my office has had no correspondence, no discussions, no involvement, end quote, in the Convention Centre process when he and his Chief of Staff dined with Sky City Board on the 4th of November, was given a presentation at that evening and urged them to think outside the box?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, quite simply, the question the member's asking that I answered was in relation to the expression of interest process that was run by Mr Brownlee at that point as the Minister. And the point at which the member raises is quite right. All of that was in the public domain. I myself had said I'd had dinner with Sky City. That's all covered in Part 1 of the report. And in Part 1 of the report, the Auditor-General says there's absolutely no issues at all. So all of that was in the public domain.
Supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given that the Deputy Auditor-General found it was, quote, not appropriate for the Ministerial Office staff to continue meeting with Sky City, why did he allow his Chief of Staff to meet with Sky City executives 5 times, his Deputy Chief of Staff and Chief Executive DPMC to also meet with Sky City, and himself to meet with Sky City twice, all immediately before a supposedly open tender process?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speak again. I go through the process. Firstly, let us quote from the report, which is the basic proposition the member's making, that there was some cosy deal. The Auditor-General says, we have seen no evidence to suggest that the final decision to negotiate with Sky City was influenced by any inappropriate considerations. The Auditor-General also says in the report it's actually quite normal and standard for ministers and the Prime Minister to have discussions with companies. Well, the member might not like it because it doesn't suit his narrative, but it's actually in the report if he wants to read it. Quite normal for that to happen. Nothing to see there. The situations the members outlined all happened in the exploratory phase, Part 1. Auditor-General says nothing to see there.
Supplementary question, David Shearer.
Was he warned by Jerry Brownlee on the 1st of March 2010 that, quote, too many people were talking to Sky City? And if so, why did his Chief of Staff, who promised to step back, continue to meet with Sky City at least 2 more times?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, what did happen at that time was we were moving beyond the feasibility stage to an expression of interest. What happened was it was logical because there were a number of ministers involved, me as Minister of Tourism, Mr Brownlee as Minister of Economic Development and other ministers as well. There was a number of proposals. So what ultimately happened, it made sense that because what is now MB would run that process, one minister would handle it. That's the way we do things around here. Quite often there's a number of ministers involved and then there becomes a lead minister. That's normal practice.
Point of order, Honourable Trevor Miller.
Mr Speaker, there was the essence of that question was why did his Chief of Staff meet after the Brownlee warning? That was not addressed.
I thought the order. It would be helpful if I could make a ruling. I thought the question was satisfactorily answered and that the Prime Minister talked about it being a normal process. There were a number of other proposals on the table at that stage, and he felt it was quite normal that the Chief of Staff and ministers were involved in meeting potential proponents of the Convention Centre in Auckland. Further supplementary?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given that his Chief of Staff asked Sky City what regulatory relief it required in return for building the Convention Centre, was that question put to other bidders, and if not, does he consider that to be even-handed?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, there was an expression of interest process where in fact all of those who decided to tender were told actually the government was very cash-strapped. Every deal was different in terms of the way it negotiated. Sky City was in a position where they were able potentially to go through a process where in return for some concessions they were prepared to fully fund the process. And in fact this is the whole debate. Because, in fact, I am answering the question, Trevor. If you want me to go through it, I can. If you want me to sit down, I'm more than happy to do so. But if you go through the process, Part 1, the exploratory phase, as the Auditor-General says, nothing to see there. Part 3, the negotiations. Well,
point of order.
Speaker, I was waiting for the answer to this question. I actually asked were the other bidders offered regulatory relief as did Sky City receive?
And the answer from the Prime Minister, in my mind, was quite clear. All of those involved in the expression of interest process were advised that there was a cash-strapped government.
Point of order, I don't want to be, with the greatest respect, I don't want the answer to be interpreted by you. I want the Prime Minister to answer that question.
With the greatest respect to you, sir, you're asking me to interpret whether I think the Prime Minister has satisfactorily answered your question. And I was doing that. Now, the member has further supplementaries if he wants to ask them. Point of order, Dr Russell Norman.
Your answer was that all the bidders were told the government is cash-strapped.
No, that wasn't my answer. That was the answer from the Prime Minister.
And the question was, were all bidders told that they could get, or were they seeking regulatory relief? Now, if the government is cash-strapped, there is more than one response to being cash-strapped. It could be that they want a low bid. It could be that they're seeking regulatory relief. So for the Minister, the Prime Minister, simply say the government told all bidders that it was cash-strapped does not answer the question.
With respect, again, I have judged that the Prime Minister has, to my satisfaction, answered the question. The Leader of the Opposition has further supplementaries if he wants to delve into the answer by the Prime Minister. And that's the way it should happen. It's not for members to take points of order to continue to dispute an answer that's given if I have ruled that it is satisfactory. So further supplementary, Leader of the Opposition.
To the Prime Minister, given his Chief of Staff asked Sky City what regulatory relief it required, was regulatory relief offered to the other bidders on the convention centre?
Right, Honourable Prime
Mr.
Minister.
Speaker, firstly, regulatory relief hasn't been offered to Sky City. That may be part of the negotiations that they want. But actually, all bidders were told that we were looking for creative solutions. It was a cash-strapped government. Every bid was different. In fact, in the case of every bid, with the exception of Sky City, they were asking the government for $300-odd million to build it.
Supplementary question.
To the Prime Minister, is he saying that his Chief of Staff did not offer Sky City or did not ask them if they wanted regulatory relief or not?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
What I'm saying is no agreement has been reached with Sky City, although we hope one will. But what is quite clear is in the early exploratory stages where we had discussions with Sky City, I told them myself, think creatively and see what deal you can come up with. At that point, after we'd done that, which is all in phase one, for which the Auditor-General says there's nothing to see, everything is totally fine and that's okay, we went to an expression of interest process. What the Auditor-General doesn't like about that process is, she says, well...
No, look, I'm sorry, but I have been very patient, but the question I asked was, did his Chief of Staff ask or offer Sky City regulatory relief? It's simple.
Well, I think the Prime Minister certainly moved to the extent of saying that he himself offered regulatory relief. It would be helpful. Order! Order! I'm trying to rule on... It would be helpful if the Prime Minister was able to answer with respect to the Chief of Staff. Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that may well be the case that that's a proposal, but this is the whole point. The proposal of the deal to Sky City, the proposal of the deal to Sky City was one where we said to Sky City, if you want to come up with a proposal, the government's prepared position is no cash, come up with a range of options. In fact, what the Auditor-General says is that having gone through 5 people in expressions of interest, what they were unable to do, the officials at that point, was to advise the government what actually would be on the table. That's what took the extended period of time. The Auditor-General believes that we should have truncated discussions. We don't.
Point of order.
So, sorry to keep doing this, but I just want a simple answer to a very simple question. Did his Chief of Staff offer Sky City regulatory relief? Simple.
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, the simple answer is I'm sure the Chief of Staff reiterated my comments, which were to think laterally, of which that might be a possibility, and that's been the basis of the whole deal. That's the point, isn't it? Come up with some proposals and we'll have a look. The problem with the whole issue was actually we've been unable to actually assess
Right Honourable
those.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker.
Right Honourable Winston Peters. Right Honourable Winston Peters, point of order.
Well, given who's there now, anybody could have the job, but my point is this. The Prime Minister is being asked a simple question, and he's refusing to answer it.
No,
Thinking laterally is not the answer. Did he or did he not, or his Chief of Staff, engaged in that arrangement?
And
that's what he's being asked.
Order, and the Prime Minister's answer at the start was he's sure that his Chief of Staff repeated the same sort of offers that the Prime Minister had made to all the bidders about being expensive with their ideas.
That's not the question. That is not the question. The question is, was there a special offer made?
No, the question...
Not to think laterally, but what was the offer?
Order, that was not the question. And the question has now very definitely been satisfactorily answered to my... The answer was he was sure that his Chief of Staff repeated very similar statements to the Prime Minister. If the members bothered to listen to the question and to the answers, I'm sure we'd have far less points of order about the quality of answers. So is this a supplementary question?
Yeah.
Further supplementary question, David Shearer.
Given that he told Sky City that the government was...
Could the member start again?
Sorry, thank you, sir. Given that he told Sky City that the government was providing no capital funds for the convention centre, did he provide the same information to other bidders? And if not, does he consider this to be even-handed?
Mr.
Right
Speaker,
Honourable Prime Minister.
The member is actually quoting me incorrectly. I said the government's preferred position was no cash input. Yes, that was made clear to other bidders that their government was cash-strapped and was preferred. Yes, it was made clear through the expression of interest process that other tenderers should put up the best proposal they could. One happened to put up a PPP, which meant the government paid over a long period of time. One happened to put up regulatory changes. Others basically put up a proposal where we paid for it.
Further supplementary? Supplementary question, David Shearer.
At what point in his interactions with Sky City was he told that Sky City wanted additional pokey machines as a condition for funding its convention centre?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that would have occurred when the officials came back at the end of phase 2 and said to the ministers, we think you should accept the Sky City proposal. It would require these sorts of changes which would then have to be negotiated in part 3, which is what we're doing at the moment.
Right. At what point did the Prime Minister come to understand that the condition of Sky City's bid was that there be more poking machines made available to them?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that can't actually be confirmed because we actually don't have a deal with them and they may well come up with a variety of different proposals. But in 2009, when I had the dinner with Sky City and said, think laterally, of course I assumed that they would want to have more poking machines or an extension to their licence. By the way, that's exactly what Labor did in 2002.
Point of order.
No, supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston
of the
Peters.
Prime Minister, what discussions were he and his staff involved in regarding the planned location of the Sky City Convention Centre on land not owned by Sky City, but New Zealand taxpayers?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I can't detail the exact ones, but what was clear was that if Sky City was to build a larger convention centre than the original one they wanted, at some point I was aware that they would need to acquire land. That land was owned by Television New Zealand.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Well, how did the Sky City conclude it had access to taxpayer-owned TVNZ state-owned asset land if he didn't do a secret side deal in favour of his mates at the casino on that issue?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, it's pretty straightforward. Sky City, after they decided that they would be prepared to enter an expression of interest process to have a larger convention centre, went off to their architects. Their architects designed such a thing, realised they needed more land, worked out who owned the land and approached Television New Zealand.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston
If that
Peters.
is true, how come Television New Zealand and its board had no awareness of that, but Sky City did? Is it not true that he promised Sky City that his government would privatise TVNZ's assets? Well, you can laugh, but the board has no knowledge. At the time I'm talking about, they have no knowledge of this. So Jerry can laugh all he likes, embarrassedly I might say. But in fact was a secret side deal, is it not true, Prime Minister, in favour of Sky City, in favour of his mates, and how sleazy is that?
Right Honourable Prime Minister, probably with no reference to the latter part of the question.
I can't speak for the Television New Zealand board, but I'm finding it reasonably hard to believe that, given Television New Zealand entered a commercial agreement with Sky City to sell land which they owned, they did so without their board knowing. If that happened, then maybe their board process needs to be improved and maybe the mixed ownership model would work for them, but contrary to what the member says, we have no plans to sell them or enter in part of the mixed ownership process.
Question number 3, Materia Ture.